Commenting on the essential disconnection of people from the rest of creation, environmentalist John Muir wrote, "Most people are on the world, not in it, have no conscious sympathy or relationship to anything about them, undiffused, separate, and rigidly alone like marbles of polished stone, touching but separate." Well, what if we, like John Muir, could somehow learn to cultivate a mindset that helps us to remember our true interconnectedness with all things? Better yet, what if we could educate our children in such a way that they would never forget that truth in the first place? That's a question at the heart of this episode. Welcome to the Earthkeepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life. And for many in the Earthkeepers community, that includes our spiritual practices. My name is Forrest Inslee, and in this episode we'll be talking to Bonnie Cretton, founder and director of Woodsong Forest School in Southeast Tennessee. Bonnie is committed to raising up a generation of children who see themselves as integrally connected to all life on Earth. She believes that when children are educated in ways that promote a sense of belonging to all nature, they will inevitably grow up to be Earthkeepers.
Through Forest School experience, they come day after day throughout all of the seasons and all types of weather and are learning and exploring and playing in this natural setting. And they're developing a deep relationship with nature. And through that relationship, our hope is that as they get to know nature and they feel loved by creation, that they in turn will reciprocate that relationship and they will fall in love with and feel connected with the natural world. And then as they grow up, they will advocate for nature.
Welcome, friends, to the Earthkeepers podcast. Bonnie, tell us a bit about the work that you do and specifically how it engages issues of earth care.
So I'm the founder and director of Woodsong Forest School. It's a small nonprofit organization in Southeast Tennessee. And we work with children ages 3 to 6, and then primarily, and then we also work with kids ages 7 to 12. Through the Forest School philosophy and the work that we do, we engage children in the natural world. They return again and again to the same forest that we spend our time at. It's about 400 acres in Southeast Tennessee. There are these beautiful old growth trees and creeks and a lake. And these children, through Forest School experience, they come day after day throughout all of the seasons and all types of weather and are learning and exploring and playing in this natural setting. And they're developing a deep relationship with nature. And through that relationship, our hope is that as they get to know nature and they feel loved by creation, that they in turn will reciprocate that relationship and they will fall in love with and feel connected with the natural world. And then as they grow up, they will advocate for nature. And we know that that's kind of a long game in terms of restorative justice for the environment, but we think that it really matters. The work that we're doing matters in the sense that not only are we influencing and holding sacred space for children to develop a relationship with nature, but their parents will also develop a relationship with nature and hopefully advocate for and change their own lives in order to help better protect and take care of the environment.
So just so I'm clear, this is not recess. This is not field trips. They're not traipsing back into a building at the end of their outdoor time. This is school. they are outdoors for all of school every day.
That's right. So, what we were doing is all outdoors in all types of weather. There's no bad weather, only bad clothing. So, they have great gear and they're exploring when it's raining. Nature, when there are no walls and nature is always changing around them throughout all of the seasons and day in and day out in different types of weather, the children stay in a state of awe and wonder, and they're engaged with and asking great questions about the world around them. And so, through that lens, through their delight led learning, the teachers will step into that space and scaffold the learning when appropriate and introduce new content. But really, we're focused on, especially for our youngest learners, ages 3 to 6, on process and not particular content. So, what we're really valuing with our youngest students is the ability to grow in and continue to think critically. So, we're offering them sacred space so that they can develop those soft skills. They're learning to innovate and to problem solve and to work together as a team in really profound ways. They're growing in their communication skills. And so we're kind of tilling the soil of their mind before they start to receive all of these seeds of content and start to learn the important skills that they'll need to know as they get older.
Well, I want to come back to the philosophy behind this because I think there's just a lot of richness there we can explore. But I want to know first about you a little bit and about what drives you to be an advocate. I mean, why did you start the forest school?
So, when I was a little girl, I loved spending time outside. It's where I felt most alive and free and most myself. And my grandfather had a big farm, and my cousins and I were able to just be free in that place. And some of my earliest memories outside as a child are running through wide open spaces and climbing trees and being up in those trees and just feeling held and feeling loved and connected with something greater than myself, even though I didn't maybe have the questions or the language to articulate what I was sensing deep inside. It was this ineffable knowing that there was life larger than me. And in reality, there really was. I'm being held by this tree that's very much alive. But also, I just felt this deep spiritual knowing that in this beautiful, wild space, that love is what brought all of it into being. And so it inspired me as I had my own children. I had been an educator at that point, a public educator for several years. And I'd even taught at the university level, teaching teachers how to teach. And when I had my own daughters and I started thinking about what type of early childhood education I would want for them and hope for them, I came across the forest school model, and it just deeply resonated with everything that I would want for my own children. I wanted them to have this expansive educational experience where they are able to ask big questions. And instead of being placed in this box of compliance and conformity, they're able to move more freely in who they are as these, whole beings. And for them to become their whole and authentic and true selves, I just wanted them to have this space where their education, learning, and play were not two separate things. And I felt like the forest school model offers children an environment that allows them to become their most authentic and whole selves. That happens through the expansiveness of creation around them. It beckons children to enter into the complexity and the beauty and the mystery of creation by being creative themselves and innovating themselves and valuing all of the life and all of the discoveries that they find in that space. And I knew that that is where I wanted my own children to learn. So it also inspired me to found a school for other children to learn in that space as well.
I have looked at some of the photos and video clips in social media about Woodsong. And in particular, I found myself both moved and inspired by some of the things the kids were doing. There was one group of kids in particular, and they were building a dam, right? There was apparently a small creek or something, and they built the dam, and then they were watching the creek overflow the dam and then flood down to the space they had cleared. And that just took me right back to my own childhood, because so much of my childhood was spent doing things like that, right? And it was the way we played. I mean, play was also an adventure. We wouldn't have cast it, into a frame of learning experience, but it clearly was when I think back to it. And you have used the word play a couple of times to describe what the kids are doing. What is that relationship between play and learning?
There is a fantastic TED Talk, if you're interested in checking it out, by Dr. Peter Gray. It's called The Decline of Play. And in it, he discusses in a very simple but articulate way how, if we look at this story of human beings from an evolutionary, biology standpoint, we know that mammals have evolved that young mammals learn through play. We can look at all other different types of species, like look at lion cubs. They're learning how to become a lion in the wild. And through different experiments that scientists have ran, Dr. Gray talks about this in his TED Talk. They'll take mice and take them away from the group, and they don't play and they don't socialize with these other mice. And then when they're reintroduced, they have social anxiety, very negative mental health, and they aren't able to adjust and show resilience. And so throughout all of human history, and even in other cultures, anthropologists have given us lots of examples of how young children learn how to become adults through play. They work through trauma through play. They practice how to socialize and work through problems together through play. And also, if a child is playing and discovers knowledge, then they remember it through their own choice, through their own delight-led learning, much more profoundly than if they were sat down and given a worksheet or a teacher tried to lead them toward that same discovery. So there's a lot of research that has shown us just how significant play is in early childhood development, and also how in our culture it is often looked at as a waste of time. And so play is not, we typically identify play as children going out on the soccer field and they're playing a sport. But that's not play. Play is unstructured, child-led discovery or child-led play. It's totally unstructured and it's not being guided by adults. And so children need that in order to develop into whole, happy, healthy adult human beings.
I'm wondering if you think that actually, then, given the model of education that is more prevalent today, if maybe that's missing. Seems to me that there's a lot more play involved in the approach that you're taking than you would see in an average, even a kindergarten, honestly.
Yes, and there is a fantastic report. It's called Crisis in the Kindergarten by the Alliance for Childhood. It's available in a PDF format online. In that report, it details how the decline of play in kindergarten has taken place in the United States over, the last handful of decades, and predominantly since the 1980s. Kindergarten, the whole idea of kindergarten was started 150 years ago in Germany by a German educator named Frederick Froebel. And kindergarten literally is children's garden. So in German. So these children in kindergarten were not learning letters and numbers and shapes and colors. They were in the garden learning about herbaceous plants and trees and playing and building dens and teepees and exploring together. And slowly, as Western civilization kind of took on kindergarten as a norm and as a part of our American education system, we have changed it even since the late 1980s, 1990s, from being play-based to being much more rigorous and academically focused, even going from half day to full day and becoming much more like first grade was even, 25, 30 years ago, and probably even less than that.
The things that you're saying evoke in me actually a memory of a story of my own daughter. I'll tell you that story as a preface to a question I have. We were actually on a road trip on the West Coast, spending a lot of time just stopping at different places on the ocean. And at one point, we just followed this little road that led down to the beach somehow. And so we followed that and then walked the rest of the way. We ended up in a place where the local community was all gathered at the mouth of a river that was flowing into the ocean. And they were essentially salmon fishing because apparently at that particular time and that place, the salmon were coming in and out as part of their migratory cycle. It was cool to see the community all gathered there. So we stopped to watch and I was taking some photos. But it was also very chaotic in the sense that where the river flowed into the ocean, there were these huge and crazy waves just, violently tossing everywhere. But what made it more chaotic and frightening was the fact that not only was the community gathered, but there were hundreds of seals. And the seals were there for the same reason. They were waiting for the salmon as well. And some of the seals were huge, just enormous. But then there was a group of smaller ones who were being basically pushed out of the way by the bigger ones. And so they were gathered toward the beach, basically waiting for their turn and waiting for scraps. Well, I was taking photos and my daughter decided that she was going to take care of those seals. So she wandered away down the beach, and there were different places on the beach where there were so many salmon that they were being stranded on the sand at times. And so she would be looking around, finding the salmon, which were, almost as big as she was. She was maybe 6 or 7 at the time. And so she'd lift up these salmon and they'd be flipping and flapping against her legs. And she'd carry them down to the beach. And then she'd throw them to all the younger seals. And they would gather around her to grab this fish and begin to eat it. I saw this scene at the moment where she had thrown the salmon and the seals were all gathered around her in a circle. And of course, my heart stopped. I was just completely paralyzed. And my impulse was to shout and say, stop, and run down and pick her up and rescue her. But something stopped me. And I thought, no, this for her is a defining moment.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening right now is going to happen for the rest of her life, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's making choices to do a very scary thing, to approach the ocean, to approach these seals. And she had a reason to do it. She wanted to feed them. And I thought, if I interrupt this, I'll keep her safer. And yet, I don't know what she's going to gain from the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, my heart stops when I think about it, but I'm glad that I didn't stop her. So my point in all of this is when I think about what you do in the forest school that you run, some of the images and videos I've seen are of kids doing risky things, like walking on logs, right? And throwing things with catapults and things that might motivate parents to say, wait, stop, be safe, get down from there. Don't take that risk. But it seems like maybe risk is part of the formula of what makes Woodsong work.
Yes, I think that, risk is so important for children to be able to grow into themselves. They need to be able to take risks and learn to fail well, to take measured risks and to fall down and to figure out how to get back up and to learn how to solve that problem in a different way so that they can move forward. Now, to be honest with you, the risks that children are taking at Woodsong are quite moderate in comparison to forest schools like in Scandinavian countries where children are literally climbing 20 plus, sometimes 30 feet up into trees. We really manage risk in a different way. Our students don't climb higher than twice their height. Typically, they hold sticks that are longer than their arms down toward the ground. But when it comes to, balancing on a fallen tree that maybe they might slip and fall 2 feet to the ground or something, or depending on their age, it's a different height per the context of the child and what they're participating in or trying to do. But that is a healthy risk, and it's not really that consequential, and what we know through research that's been done on this type of early childhood education is that children are much more likely to get hurt on a playground than they are in the forest, because we don't help them climb up. If they climb a tree, they have to climb on their own, because that's how they can figure out how to get down. Now, we're there to spot them, to support them, to ask them, how does your body feel? Does your body feel safe? Do your feet feel stable? But we don't say, oh, be careful, because that's so vague, and it ends up paralyzing them from taking risks. It infuses fear. And instead, we might say, oh, be mindful on the trail. If you're running, there are roots and there are rocks that you need to pay close attention to with your eyes. We just give them specific information that empowers them to move through that risk in maybe a more mindful and intentional way. And so at Woodsong, we want our teachers we hope to be very present to our students, and to be able to hold space for them and encourage them to be very present, to be embodied, to come into their senses as well. And so that's the type of language that we utilize when we want to encourage them to take healthy risks. If a child is climbing up a rock wall that is a safe distance up into the air, then we'll just encourage them to pay attention, to test every handhold. Is the branch or root thicker than your wrist? That's how you know it's going to hold your body. We give them the information that they need so they can take safe risks. But if we don't take risks, and if we over sanitize childhood to where there is no failure and everything is comfortable, then when that child grows up and, begins to make life choices as an adult, the first time that they are faced with an obstacle that they may not feel like they can overcome, they're not going to have the grit and the resilience to press through that challenge. And so we're always thinking about offering a holistic education, so that we're not only educating their minds and their bodies, but also their hearts. And we want them socially and emotionally to be able to be resilient as adults. And we look at them as that. Like these small humans are full and whole people. And we're thinking about, helping them grow into these mighty trees that we have in our forest, helping them grow into these whole adults who are happy and healthy and successful people. And we know that risk taking is a part of being able to make your own way in the world.
Now, Woodsong Forest School is not a religious school, and yet a couple of times to describe what you do, or maybe what motivates you, you've used the word spiritual. And the listeners for this podcast are actually concerned about that question: is what is the intersection of spirituality and earthkeeping? And I'm wondering how you navigate that space, and how you would even define the spiritual elements of the work that you do.
I think that spirituality and earthkeeping can't be separated. My spiritual health as a human being is connected to the spiritual health of every other human being. And not only every other human being, but I would argue every other living being. That our freedom and our spiritual health is not an isolated experience. That as living beings on this planet, our freedom and our health and our vibrancy and our ability to thrive is all interconnected, just like everything in the forest is. I pursue, with my life, I want to pursue what I think is the author and creator and what holds together everything that we experience and see, which is the ultimate expression of love. We always talk about with Woodsong teachers, how can we take this from Mr. Rogers, but how can we love the children in our care? How can we love them into being? And I think that all living beings have been loved into being. And personally, I am a Christian, and I've journeyed, in a very deep way through, processing the aspects of my faith that I inherited as being a person who was raised in the South. And I've processed through questioning and pursuing and seeking, who is God in the world. And I think that Jesus, if we look to his example, has shown us that who God is, that the Word is love, and that through love, all things have been made, by love and for love and through love and to love. And that if I am a follower of Christ, then I will live in that love. And that love doesn't end with me. It should be extended to every other living being that love has also brought into existence. So I hope that the work that we're doing at Woodsong, we don't feel that it's necessary to frame what these children are experiencing with our words or with a certain spiritual framework. Because of my own experience as a child in nature, I know that God loved me into being through the big oak trees that I sat in their branches. And, when I climbed the small dogwood in my parents' yard even, and I touched its mosaic pebbly bark and watched it bloom in the spring every year, and I loved that tree and that tree loved me, I know that I was connected to the deepest parts of myself and who God is as the creator and as the master artist of the universe. And so I know that these children, I don't have to give them language to understand the experiences that they're having in nature. God will draw them to himself, and he will love them through his art, through the masterpiece of creation. As an educator and even my staff, I encourage them to love these children into being. So I want to embody love and to be an expression of love in the world. And my vocation as an educator is that expression of who God is in me. And I know there's this deep resonance that when I'm in the forest and this sourwood tree is being itself, it's glorifying God in the essence of it being who it is, or this pileated woodpecker, pecking on the tree, or hearing the Carolina wren sing her song. Those beautiful beings in creation are glorifying God through embodying the essence of what they were created to be. And so do we as human beings glorify God through embracing our own humanity, being fully human in what we were created to be. And so for me, that's resting in being, this educator, a teacher is the shape of my soul, and holding sacred space for these children to move into the fullness of their own humanity and their own authentic selves and the gifts that they have to bring into the world, because that's what the world needs. The world needs everyone to lean into who we were created to be.
In this episode, we explore what it means to live into the fullest expression of who we are meant to be. And this has everything to do with Earthkeepers' mission. We are committed to helping individuals and communities to discover their own unique places and relationship to the rest of creation. If you resonate with the diversity of ideas you hear through the Earthkeepers podcast, we urge you to go to our website at www.circlewood.online earthkeepers. There, you can quickly and easily make a tax-deductible donation. As an added bonus, all of our contributors will get exclusive access to additional interview material that was not included in this episode. Whether you become a financial partner or not, we do want to express our sincere gratitude to all of you who listen to this podcast and for standing with us as we love and care for our planet. Thank you. Now, my guess would be that the spirituality, that outlook that you're describing, maybe is not the norm in your cultural context, and maybe even your sensibility toward creation or even your stance on our responsibility to care for creation. Those things don't seem to me that they would be the norm for Tennessee where you live. And so I'm wondering, how do you live in that tension between what you have come to believe and maybe the prevailing belief systems around you, and how do you navigate that tension?
Navigating that tension with a posture of compassion is really important. Because if I move or live out of a place of judgment or frustration or, a lack of understanding toward people who may not be in a relationship with nature in the same way that I am, or who may not share that same perspective on who God is as an expression of love in the world, if I move toward them, or let's say move away from them, because I think that's more of the ubiquitous response. We're so polarized in our country and in our culture that if people think differently than us, then we demonize and we dehumanize and we have nothing to do with them and we can't understand their perspective. And it's difficult to disagree with people or maybe not to share the same perspective. But I think that if we have a posture of compassion and practice coming to the table to reconcile, to share, we may not agree, we may not end up sharing the same perspective, but if we can move toward each other instead of moving away from one another, proximity changes perspective. And I think that that's the same thing with nature, right? If we come close to nature, then our perspective on nature is transformed. We no longer want to objectify and exploit nature because then we know it and we love it and we've been changed. And I don't even want to say it. I want to say we've been changed by her or him, the essence of life that exists in the natural world. We become transformed by that proximity. And in the same way, with other human beings, when we don't share the same perspective, my judgment or frustration will never change or illuminate their opinion. But if I have a posture of love and openness and move toward people and invite them, because that's all I can really do for us, I can only say, this is what we're doing in the world. It's beautiful. It's filled with life and joy and delight. And all I can do is invite people to come be a part of it. And they get to choose. But if they do, then perhaps, their perspective will also be changed.
So I am imagining our listeners hearing you talk about this very different way of educating children. And I am assuming that many people are going to resonate with that and think there is rightness to what you're saying. They recognize it as truth. I wonder, what would you advise people who are having that response? In particular, what can people do to actually make a difference in their own context, given what they've heard you talk about? What are the options that are available? Can they, if they wanted to, incorporate principles of forest school into, their own educational settings? Are there sort of different implications that are, not so much focused on building a school, but maybe principles they can derive from what you're talking about? What action points might you recommend to people?
I think this time that we're in has really reawakened people in the sense of desiring a relationship with nature. And so, nature based or forest based education is actually in this golden hour due to COVID-19 and people being isolated or people seeking safer or more healthy options for their child to have in person educational experiences. So, we're seeing that there are more and more nature based schools or forest kindergartens being founded, developed all across the United States. So there are more opportunities. So I would say, first of all, if you're interested, do a Google search, look and see, is there an opportunity that's nearby that I may not know about? That is a forest school or forest kindergarten, or maybe even a homeschool co op that I can participate in, or an after school program one day a week. So there are opportunities out there that maybe people aren't familiar with because they've just never heard of the concept. So I would say first look and see if something already exists. Secondly, even public schools can begin to incorporate the principles of nature based or forest school education. Forest school is place based, so you're returning to the same place throughout all the seasons in a nature immersion way. So they're coming in all different types of weather. And that can happen in a public school setting where maybe there's a forest behind the school, or maybe there's a field, or maybe you're able to take field trips to a nature center or a local state park or a national park and develop a relationship with a space that you can return to. Maybe it's a play group even that parents return to over and over with children. So it's place-based, nature immersion, and then it's play-based. So it's tempting for teachers, especially public educators, to want to control what happens in the forest. But even if you're a public educator and you want to incorporate this into your weekly rhythms, I know public schools that have done Forest Fridays where they have an outdoor or nature-based day where they've embodied the principles of forest school just on a singular Friday every week. Or some have created forest kindergartens in Chattanooga, Red Bank Elementary, Gilbert Elementary in North Georgia. These are public schools that have created forest kindergartens or utilize the forest school model in their entire school because they saw the research-based benefits. So you can begin to adapt these principles of place-based education, nature immersion, play-based education, and then the idea of emergent curriculum or delight-led learning. So holding space for the children through their own interests and discoveries and their own exploration to step into that and introduce concepts in math or literacy, science, social studies through what they're interested in. Because that makes the learning that much more meaningful. It feels relevant, it feels connected, it feels seamless. So the child or the children internalize, the things that they're learning outdoors in a way that they wouldn't if it weren't such a hands-on and material and embodied learning experience. So I think that you can incorporate these principles in a lot of different ways, in many different settings. And then, if you are interested in it, if this resonates with you deeply, there are lots of different forest school teacher training programs that are out there. I work as a consultant for Forest School Teacher Institute. There are online trainings that are offered through FSTI, and, you can go through training and end up creating your own forest kindergarten or forest school in your own city or your own space. And so I just encourage people I think most people, when they hear about forest school or nature based education, it resonates with the deepest parts of who we are because most of us have these memories within our hearts and minds of being a child and feeling alive in nature. Usually when I ask people, when I say, do you have a memory playing outside when you were a kid? Some sort of memory that really shaped them when they were a young human. They acted as like a catalyst, either in their relationship with nature or in some way, it became a part of their story and a part of their life. And so I think it resonates with us also because we're carrying the memory of our ancestors. And it's only been since the Industrial Revolution that we've made this massive migration indoors. For the most part, as human beings, our stories are deeply rooted in nature as being a part of nature, not other or outside or over, but literally being in relationship with nature as family. And so I think when we allow ourselves to remember that deep remembering in our own stories and in the human story, that it kind of beckons out of us this deep resonance and this inspiration to seek and find what feels most real and true.
You're talking about discovering really your essential self in nature,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing who you are in those places made me think of a story from my own childhood. My grandfather built a cabin in the 40s in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, and we would spend a lot of time up there, especially in the summers. We would just go up and be there for the whole summer. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember liking to walk alone in the woods. And one day I was walking and not looking where I was going. I was looking up, trying to find a particular bird I was hearing. And I fell into a pit. It was a deep pit. And I'm not sure why someone dug a pit in the woods, but there it was. And it was well over my head. It was probably about 10 feet deep, and the sides were cut straight. So I fell to the bottom, and when I kind of recovered my wits, I looked around me, and the whole floor of the pit was covered with toads. They were all alive, jumping around, and they too had not been looking where they were going and fallen into the pit, and there was no way to get out. And so I thought, well, here we are in the pit together. And I was really into toads and snakes and all of that as a child, so I didn't mind one bit. In fact, I thought, this is why I fell into the pit, because I need to rescue these toads. So one by one, I took the toads and as gently as I could threw them
Mm.
over the top of the pit to set them free. Finally, there were no toads left, and it was just me. And so I sat down, and about an hour later, my parents sent out a search party and they found me. But I was in no hurry to be found, because as I was throwing those toads, I thought I could do this forever, right? This is who I am. I'm a rescuer of toads. And so I think that actually it had a profound effect on what I do today in terms of earth care, is really feeling like it's an essential part of me to be caring and restoring and even advocating
Mm-hmm.
for the earth. So I appreciate you bringing it up in me by sharing your story. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome. I think that it's so interesting. We all have these moments like in our childhood where we are called by our true name. I think our the truest name that we all have is beloved. Like we are love. That's who we are. But like in that story, you are the beloved rescuer of toads. But think about that opportunity for us that you had to be silent and still and in solitude as a child. And in that moment, the truth of who you are was spoken into your life. And that's really where spiritual transformation happens, isn't it? In silence and stillness and solitude. And so many adults don't have that. And you know what's scary is a lot of children don't have it either. Our lives are just filled with noise and distraction, so much so that even when we are quiet, and still, we have to pick up our phone and check it and look, because we can't handle what happens to our egos when we are silent and still and in that alone place. And so in forest school, that's something that's also quite countercultural. We allow children and help and offer opportunities for them to build the capacity to be silent and still and alone in nature. We have a mindful arrival every single day. Some days that's yoga, some days that's deep breathing, some days it's forest bathing, but a lot of days it's a sit spot. And they build up the capacity, young children, to sit 8-10 minutes in silence alone. They're being supervised, but they're spread out in the forest and they're alone and they're quiet and they're just listening. And I hope maybe one day they'll be telling a story about an experience that they had in nature where they were quiet and still and alone, and maybe they feel or sense the deepest and most true part of themselves being called out, just like you did, the beloved toad rescuer. And for me, like the beloved tree climber, those true parts of who we are being called out in our inner child, and that we can carry it with us. And so we think that's important to help children embrace mindfulness and turning inward and building the capacity of their inner landscape, or caring for their souls in a way that we know that gentle whisper of love will beckon them and call them out and call them forth into the world.
We've been in conversation with Bonnie Cretton, founder and director of Woodsong Forest School. If you want to know more about Woodsong or about forest schools in general, you'll find information and links in this episode's show notes. We invite you to become a financial supporter of Earthkeepers. Please visit our website at www.circlewood.online/earthkeepers to make a donation that will help expand the reach and frequency of this production. It also helps us immensely when you leave a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And please share this podcast with anyone you know who seeks to become an agent of change and advocacy for the good of the earth. Earthkeepers podcast explores ways in which we can change ourselves, our communities, and our cultures to help us to care for the earth in holistic and regenerative ways. Through curated conversations, we highlight the wisdom of thought leaders and change agents who are making a difference and showing us a way forward. When Earthkeepers stand together, they amplify the impact of their resistance against environmental injustice and multiply their efforts for renewal and restoration. We invite you to support us by becoming a subscriber. You can help us reach more people with our message by leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And please, share Earthkeepers podcast with anyone you know who seeks a better relationship to the earth. This podcast is an expression of Circlewood, an organization whose purpose it is to cultivate transformative communities that love and care for all creation. If you'd like to learn more about the Circlewood community, please visit our website at www.circlewood.online or write to us at podcast@circlewood.online. I'm Forrest Tinsley, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Forrest Reed is our sound engineer and the creator of our original music. Our research assistant is Rochelle Nordman. Thank you, friends, for listening. And please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.